heightened ability to do this. And the power of doing that is actually that when you are in environments where you feel like you're focused too much internally and you'd like to be focused more externally, you can actually do that deliberately. So while there's no one single universally true theory of emotion, at the intersection of many of the existing theories, there are really some ground truths. If we want to understand emotions, we have to look at where emotions first develop. And the rule that every good neuroanatomist knows is that if you want to understand what a part of the brain does, you have to address two questions. You have to know what connections does that brain area make? And you need to know what's called the developmental origin of that structure. What are the brain areas for emotion? And nowadays there's a lot of debate about this. But the important thing to understand is that emotions do arise in the brain and body. And if we want to understand how emotions work, we have to look how emotions are built. And they are built during infancy, adolescence, and puberty. And then it continues into adulthood. But the groundwork is laid down early in development when we are small children. You were born into this world without really any understanding of the things around you. Now, there are two ways that you can interact with the world, and you're always doing them more or less to some degree at the same time. Those are interoception, paying attention to what's going on inside you, what you feel internally, and exteroception, paying attention to what's going on outside you. Hold that in mind, please, because the fact that you're both interocepting and exterocepting is true for your entire life, and it sets the foundation for understanding emotions. It's absolutely critical. As an infant, you didn't have any knowledge of what you needed. You didn't understand hunger. You didn't understand cold or heat or any of that. When you needed something, you experienced that as anxiety. You would feel an increase in alertness if you had to use the bathroom. You would feel an increase in alertness if you were hungry. And you would vocalize. You would cry out. You would act agitated. You might coo. You might do a number of different things. And then your caregiver, whoever that might have been, would respond to that. So this is actually really important to understand that a baby, when you were a baby and when I was a baby, we didn't have any sense of the outside world except that it responded to our acts of anxiety, essentially. All developmental psychologists agree that babies lack the ability to make cognitive sense of the outside world. But in this feeling of anxiety and registering one's own internal state and then crying out to the outside world, either through crying or subtle vocalizations, or even just cooing, making some noise, we start to develop a relationship with the outside world in which our internal states, our shifts in anxiety, start to drive requests, and people come and respond to those requests. And this gets to the basis of what emotions are about, which are emotions are really about forming bonds and being able to predict things in the world. We don't really have enough language to describe all the emotional states, and yet there's some core truths to what makes up an emotion. This can really help people, kids and adults, understand better what they're feeling and why, and when best to engage in certain activities, and thankfully when best to avoid certain activities too. So the way this works is the following. You need to ask yourself at any point, you could do this right now if you like, what's your level of autonomic arousal? Autonomic arousal is just the continuum, the range of alert to calm. So if you're in a panic right now, you are like 10 out of 10 on the arousal scale. If you're asleep, you're probably not comprehending what I'm saying, although maybe a little bit. But let's say you're very drowsy, you might be at a 1 or a 2. And then there's this other axis, this other question, which is what we call valence. Now, valence is a value. Do you feel good or bad? I would say I feel pretty good right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm like I feel like a 7. So I'm alert and I feel pretty good. And then there's a third thing, which is how much we are interocepting and how much we are exterocepting. All right. So how much our attention is focused internally on what we're feeling and how much it's focused externally. And this is always going to be in a dynamic balance. So, for instance, if you're really, really stressed, oftentimes that puts you in a position to be really in touch with what's going on in your body. If you start having a lot of somatic, a lot of bodily sensations, like your heart is beating so fast that you can't ignore it, then you're really strongly interoceptive. So there are these three things: how alert or sleepy you are, that's one; how good or bad you feel, that's two; and then whether or not most of your attention is directed outward or whether or not it's directed inward. And much of what we call emotions are made up by those three things. Let's return to the infant. There's the baby in the crib. It's mostly interocepting. As caregivers bring it what it needs, you hope, milk, diaper changes, etc., a warm blanket if it's cold, pull off the blanket when the baby's fussing and it's too warm, because babies get too warm also. It starts to exterocept. The baby starts to look into the outside world and start making predictions. It starts wondering how much it needs to cry, or predicting, well, if I cry like a little bit, then mom comes over and I get my milk. Babies are starting to evaluate and do all this, but they're not doing it consciously. They're doing this in order to relieve anxiety. As a young creature, an infant and young toddler, you were mainly focused inward, and you started to understand what was going on outward as a way of predicting what would bring you relief, what would remove your anxiety. And that's where the fundamental rules of your experience, your emotional experience, were laid down. So while we can't travel back in time, there is an exercise that you can do to address, at least in this moment, whether or not you have a bias for exteroception or a bias for interoception. If you close your eyes right now and concentrate on the contact of any portion of your body and trying to bring as much of your attention to that point of contact as possible. And then from there, you're going to move your attention even more deeply into, say, the sensation of what's going on in your gut. Are you full? Are you empty? Are you hungry? Are you not? Is your heart beating? At what rate? What's the cadence of your breathing? Basically bringing your focus and attention to everything at the surface of your skin and inward. So I'm going to do a rare thing on the Huberman Lab podcast. I'm going to introduce about 5 to 8 seconds of silence in order to allow you to do that a little bit. Now try and do something that for most people actually is a little bit harder, which is to purely exterocept. Put your eyes or your ears or both on anything in your immediate space. I would say look across the room, pick a panel on the wall or a leg of a table or something, and try and bring as much of your attention to that as possible. And again, I'll take about 5 seconds of silence to allow you to exterocept. Okay, so what you probably found is that you were able to do that, but that some degree of interoception is maintained. It's hard to place 100% of your attention on something externally unless it's really exciting, really novel. If you've ever watched a really great movie, presumably you're exterocepting more than you're interocepting until something exciting happens, and then you feel something. You're actually tethering your emotional experience to something external. And now you can also do this dynamically. You can decide to focus internally and then externally. You can decide to split it 50%, or 70-30. You can develop but as you notice, it takes work. These exercises are really what are at the core of these development of emotional bonds. So if somebody winks at you, you're paying attention to their wink, but then you also notice how you feel. This is very dynamic. So if it seems overwhelming to try and interocept and exterocept and then shift the balance, you do that all the time. Your brain and nervous system are fantastic at doing this. Now, some people have a very hard time breaking out of a very strongly interoceptive mode. Some people have a harder time breaking out of their exteroceptive mode. It's very interesting to note the extent to which we have biases in how interoceptive or exteroceptive we are.
Thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more health and wellness tips.